Hi, homies. I want to talk about forgiveness in this video. This is going to be a very unconventional approach, and it's not, uh, probably not like anything that you hear about forgiveness and the virtues of it. This one is especially for people who have gone through or are experiencing narcissistic abuse specifically. This one is for you. So a lot of times in healing culture, we are told that forgiveness is the key. That is the end all, be all, the final step in your healing process. And oftentimes, as survivors of this particular kind of abuse, we can get stuck there because it's very hard to forgive someone who repeatedly put you through so much, and oftentimes the biggest betrayals of your life, and oftentimes the biggest soul-crushing experiences of your life. So when you can't forgive a person who does that, how's that going to make you feel about yourself when that's supposed to be your final healing, goal or end game? Well, I'm here to tell you that from my own personal experience, I kind of let that go. Forgiveness looked very different for me. Like, I can forgive a person for being who they are and let them go out of my life and just understand that it actually really wasn't about me. This person was going to do that regardless, and I can have compassion for the pain that they must feel on a day-to-day basis, and in order to treat people that way. But I don't have to forgive and forget. I don't have to let that person back in my life ever again, and actually, that feels amazing. The person that I needed to forgive the most was myself. Okay, I realize that I probably need to caveat this because a lot of people are going to be like, the kind of dynamic I am speaking about is a particular kind where the behavior is continuously abusive. And you have probably forgiven this person many times for the same thing. And the key is there's been no real apology or accountability. Okay, that's what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about circumstances where, someone has gone through a hard time, or someone was just human and messed up, stepped on your toes, or could have done something hurtful, but, later on they apologized, took some accountability, offered repair. In those cases, yes, forgiveness is wonderful and beautiful and highly recommended. But this is not the normal case that I'm talking about. Anyone who's gone through narcissistic abuse can understand that in these dynamics, the other person doesn't say, I'm sorry. They don't take accountability. They tend to blame it back on you. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, feeling like you have to forgive somebody like that in that kind of situation, that's probably gone on over a long time, and you probably have already, pulled out the forgiveness cards like more times than you can even remember at that point. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, and caveat, thank you. I found that I needed to forgive myself for missing or ignoring the signs, for not leaving when I should have. I needed to forgive myself for forgiving so much. I needed to forgive myself for offering compassion when I should have stood up for myself. And I needed to forgive myself for internalizing the terrible things that they said about me, to me. Forgiving ourselves is the most important forgiveness step that we can take as survivors of that kind of treatment. And, I know that it is such an unpopular and such an unspiritual opinion, and I struggle with this. And I'm going to tell you, actually, right after the biggest betrayal of my life, I checked out that book by Colin Tipping, and I even made this Facebook video on it about how amazing it was, and I did feel a lot of release in my body around it. However, if you try to do this before you actually process what has gone on, because oftentimes if you're a victim of narcissistic abuse, you don't even you're not even going to start to unravel that until like a couple years afterwards, because your brain is in such a cognitive dissonant state. Like it cannot comprehend what has happened to you right away. And it oftentimes takes until you're out of that relationship for your brain and your nervous system to actually allow you to understand what's going on. Otherwise, you would be completely overloaded and distraught beside yourself. So trying to forgive an abusive person, especially right after the fact, is such a bad idea. And what it will do is it'll leave you stuck in the trauma bond and might even have you stuck in the relationship still to allow yourself to get abused even further, which is the last thing that you want. It'll also make you susceptible to further self-abandonment, because at that point, like, your focus is on them. You feel like you want to forgive them. And that is going to highly likely cause you to further gaslight yourself. It is going to embolden them in their behavior, and it is going to come back on you in a really bad way. These are not normal relationships. These are not normal people. They do not understand forgiveness like a normal, healthy person would. Okay. So there's this new book by Dr. Ramani. Big fan. Her work saved my life throughout my whole process. And she recently released a new book for survivors of narcissistic abuse. It's called It's Not You. It's brilliant. It, even years later, it helped me really unwind some things that I still had some confusion or hangups around in my head that, I wasn't aware of. And oftentimes you'll find that when you're healing from this kind of abuse, that there's things going on in your psyche that got twisted up that you're not even going to be aware of it until someone, who's gone through it or who is an expert at it calls it out. So it's very important. And it's the worst thing about it is having to do research on this thing, but it is also the most helpful to get you back to a clear state, because things get all sorts of twisted up in there. But in her book, one of her last chapters, she writes about forgiveness. And I want to share a passage with you about this. Also in the course that I'm creating right now about heartbreak, alchemy, and recovery from these kinds of relationships. I did write a whole segment about forgiveness, when it's too soon, when it's possible, when it's not possible, because I think we need to have a little bit more self-compassion around this, because, society tells us we should be doing it one way. And if we're not doing it that way, then, we just end up further beating ourselves up during a time where, we need to have the utmost compassion and respect for what we have gone through and where we are and how we're feeling. All right, I'm going to read this quote to you from Dr. Ramani's new book, It's Not You, about forgiveness and narcissistic abuse. Quote, "In most cases, narcissistic people don't recognize forgiveness as the gift that it is and change their behavior. Instead, they likely saw it as permission to keep doing what they were doing. Forgiveness is narcissistic supply. One more thing that emboldens the narcissistic entitlement. And you may even get angry at yourself for forgiving them, especially if you get betrayed again. Forgiveness also rarely happens in real time. In a narcissistic relationship, it is something that, if it happens, tends to unfold long after you have safely extricated yourself from the relationship. Multiple studies suggest that forgiveness is not good for a person if it is not followed by an attempt to make amends or foster safety. When people repeatedly forgave a partner who behaved badly in a relationship, it negatively affected the well-being of the person doing the forgiving. Other researchers have also found that less agreeable partners were more likely to re-offend after being forgiven. And they didn't feel the pressure to change their behavior because they believed their partner wouldn't be mad at them if they did slip up again. There's even a name for all of this, the doormat effect, which states that forgiving a less agreeable partner who has behaved badly negatively affects self-respect. Most of what is written about the virtues of forgiveness does not account for narcissism and antagonism. When we do account for repeat offenders and disagreeable personalities, research suggests that it would be better for your well-being if you did not forgive. End quote. So I'm going to say I agree with that, and I experienced that myself. The first time I had a massive betrayal in my relationship, I had a big forgiveness little ceremony, and let it go. I held some space with a couple friends who knew about this situation, and we all talked about times in our life when it was hard to be honest, and I just gave this person, really held somebody in a lot of love, because I thought, how beautiful would it be if you fuck up and your loved one is just gonna really hold you in accountability, no punishment, just really hold you in a good way. And so that's what I did with some friends. And at the end of this little circle, guess who was blamed for this person's infidelity? Yeah, so this guy brought up stuff from the very beginning of our relationship, and my inability to make a decision to be with him at the beginning of the relationship, and that he was still hurt about that, which was probably I guess at that point 8 years prior. I had no idea there was still resentment around that, but if you know anything about narcissistic behavior, they will pull up anything to avoid accountability. I thought that was odd, and I was kind of like, okay. Still tried to rebuild trust with this person, and during that process, there was another big affair. So that was my experience. They did reoffend. He took it as permission to do it again, and I felt like a big fat idiot, huge, massive idiot. And at the end of it, I was like, well, at least I know my level of grace, but I will never do that again. Sorry. I really injured myself deeply in that way. I got to see my capacity for love and forgiveness, but, for somebody like that, you don't want to do it. Now, for someone who, it's genuinely a slip up of their character, they're not narcissistic, they make a mistake, yes, forgiveness is a really beautiful thing, and I do highly recommend that. I have been forgiven for, my bullshit, and I've forgiven a lot of people for stuff, but when you are dealing with that kind of person, which, at the time I had no idea what any of this stuff was, but if you are dealing with that particular kind of person and in that relationship, forgiveness is actually harmful. It can be harmful to you. So that said, if you are in a relationship like that or coming out of one, and you have a community of people around you telling you that you need to forgive in order to heal, or making you feel bad that you're all resentful and still upset about it, then I'm just going to tell you right now that they don't get it. Okay. And you can hold on to your resentments as long as you want to. At some point, you will lose the charge around it. Okay, at some point, and that's what forgiveness is for me. At some point, I just wasn't hurting around it anymore. And that's really where you want to get to. You can heal without forgiving somebody. I mean, like I said, you can forgive someone, their character or whatever, and just be like, okay, that's great. You go do you over there. I wouldn't want to get anywhere near that, and I hope I never have to. And that level of forgiveness is totally fine. You don't need to let abusive people back in their life, and don't let anybody bully you into feeling like you have to. And unfortunately, this is a very common thing that people experience, in more spiritually oriented communities. Again, and as Ramani said, all these teachings, they are true when you're dealing with normal people. But if you're dealing with somebody who is sociopathic or narcissistic, it has a completely different effect, and therefore different rules apply. Okay, I hope this is helpful. I hope it's validating. Sending you so much love and strength if you are going through this. And just remember, forgive yourself and validate yourself and hold yourself. If you can't forgive for the rest of your life, it's okay. It's okay. You didn't deserve that treatment, and some people don't deserve your forgiveness. You probably have already forgiven them a million times already, and it's okay to withhold the last one. That's fine. All right, loves. Hope this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.